This is an absolute pleasure and a privilege for me to interview for those who are seeing this for the first time, my name's Sheen Towers. This is my dear friend and co-founder of the Dialogue of Self-Liberation, Peter Trueman. And we've been filming interviews with the Dialogue of Self-Liberation live program participants, the ones who've successfully completed the course. It's a 5-week course. We're referring to our course completed participants as our TDSL alumni. Now, Peter was the very first of these, although we didn't have a course then. Now, I've been working as a therapist for the last 17 years now, passing on an understanding to the private clients I've been working with in my practice in North London. And I was taught a very valuable principle by my teacher, whose name was Vernon Bell. And he helped me to identify how to transform how I was communicating toward myself about myself. Peter, I met, was it 13 or 14 years ago? 13, 14 years ago. And Peter's the first person that reached out to me to teach him what Vernon had taught to me. So over the last probably 3 years or so, I've been lovingly passing on everything that Vernon taught me to Peter. And then throughout this year, 2020, this very strange and challenging year, together we've distilled what Vernon taught me, the principle and the techniques of transforming how we communicate toward ourselves, about ourselves, into what we are calling the Dialogue of Self-Liberation. So today, it gives me absolutely great pleasure to interview Peter. And I'm interviewing Peter about his experience of what the Dialogue of Self-Liberation is, his journey in being first introduced to this work many years ago, and how he reconnected with this. So Peter, welcome. It's wonderful to see you again.
Yeah.
And
great to meet you.
So I'd like to ask you, Peter, I'd like to start off by asking you a few questions, please. So the first question is, how did you first come to the Dialogue of Self-Liberation? What was your first experience of this?
Oh, my first experience was my introduction to you, I think, which happened in Highgate in North London 13 or 14 years ago. I'd just come back from China, where I'd been practicing Kung Fu and developing a love for Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And I decided to move to London to pursue a degree, a Bachelor of Science in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And the house I moved into in Highgate just happened to be a couple of 100 meters away from a studio where you were teaching Tai Chi and Qigong. You know, the rest is history, right? I came to the class one day, and we began the process of becoming friends. And over the course of those initial years, I think it was about 2 years in, since we'd begun getting to know each other, where you had spoken about the work you did as a therapist in London, and you know, you had expressed an interest in the work that I was doing, becoming an acupuncturist, and we did a bit of an exchange back then. You know, you had an injury with your foot, and I helped you with acupuncture and Tuina. And I was going
and my shoulder as well. You fixed my shoulder. Yes, you did.
and at the time, I was having challenges in a relationship of mine, and feeling very frustrated in you know, my lot in life. I was I felt very stuck, trapped, that I wasn't able to achieve what I felt I should be able to achieve, and also I felt trapped in a relationship, and also with a partner who had become pregnant, and we were struggling at the time. And so I had the experience of feeling very stuck, very trapped in life, and not understanding how to escape it, you know, or change the situation. And so you began a process of communication and therapy with me, where you began to teach me or share with me certain principles and certain ideas. And I think you were very generous with the ideas that you shared. And a couple of them stuck. And they made a huge amount of difference. One in particular was that that I remember was the suggestion that perhaps myself and my partner should concentrate on, we should focus on first being friends. You know, from the place that we had found ourselves in, we should first concentrate on being friends, and you know, and then without the pressure of expectation of anything else. And you know, I credit that idea with over time, you know, pursuing that idea over time. You know, it wasn't, you know, it was an idea that stuck with me, but it, you know, I can't say it you know, immediately changed the situation, but pursuing that idea over time enabled, you know, our relationship to evolve, my relationship with my partner to evolve. And it moved us to a relatively good place over time, you know, where we were able to rediscover each other in that moment. And there were some other things that you shared with me, but I think that was my first experience. And at that time, it wasn't known to me what the principle was, you know, the core principle and the techniques that we've sort of laid out, or the application that we've laid out in the project. It was just a really new perspective for understanding a situation, and how applying that perspective began to change that situation for me. So I would say that was my first experience of the dialogue of self-liberation.
As you know, in the Dialogue of Self-Liberation live program, one of the things that we emphasize is what the dialogue of self-liberation is not. And so I misinterpreted what the dialogue of self-liberation is. When Vernon was first teaching me, I thought, oh yeah, I understand that, but it was really a theoretical comprehension of what he was saying, but I hadn't actually set the wheels in motion by setting it into a practical, making use of the practical tool of this and the method of this. So in your case, I remember you sharing with me a while ago that your first experience of the dialogue of self-liberation, what you perceived it to be, was quite contrary to your mindset at the time. How would you describe what your mindset at the time was, and what you initially thought the dialogue of self-liberation was?
Well, I think we have to jump forward a couple of years actually from that initial meeting in my timeline. So I began to put the relationship on track, if you like, from that initial work with yourself, and continued moving forwards. However, for some time, I felt like I was still stuck or trapped. I wasn't, you know, able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. I felt limited in you know, my life, right? In the situation that I was experiencing. And so I turned to books, which I think is a great idea. And I discovered personal development, if you like, and personal development books, particularly, you know, some coaches like Tony Robbins and Think and Grow Rich, and these types of titles. And I'd just like to put a caveat in now, very quickly before I continue, that the dialogue of self-liberation is absolutely not life coaching or you know, those types of self-help books. They may have value, and many people have found tremendous value from them, and I did myself. But this is not that. The dialogue of self-liberation is not that. So I'll now explain why. So during that time, you know, a coach of mine, a jiu-jitsu coach, recommended, he saw I was reading a book written by an entrepreneur, and he recommended Tony Robbins. So I began reading Tony Robbins' books. And in these books, the new perspectives that I acquired, I was able to very quickly gain some benefits from the new ways of thinking that I discovered from Tony Robbins' books. They created freedom for me in that particular moment. You know, I was able to use some sort of conditioning techniques, visualization techniques, and I became a non-smoker. You know, and that's over 10 years now. You know, that I, you know, and up until that point, I tried many times and not succeeded. And some of these tools and techniques were very useful. There was certain mindsets that were recommended in the books, such as, and one in particular, which is sort of focusing on what you want, and you know, they often use the metaphor of a, you know, racing in a car, and if the car goes into a skid, if you look at the wall, that's where the car's going to go. And so what you need to do is look only in the direction you want to go, and then your body and the car will naturally turn in those directions, and you'll achieve. And sort of the learning that these types of books put out in the world is that if you focus on what you don't want, that's what you're going to get. So you need to focus solely on what you do want. And this was something, you know, like I felt tremendously empowered by reading this material. You know, here was a man who had turned his life around, and now he had a company worth 500 million, and you know, and he'd been so successful, and presidents of the United States have come to him for help, and he is, like, it is wonderful work. There is a lot of value there. And so I was very much on this track of, I'm gonna materialize what I want in the world. I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna, you know, and all I need to do is focus on exactly what it is I want, and maintain that focus until I acquire it. And so, like, when I came into, you know, at that point when I came, you know, sort of a year later, when, you know, we were continuing our discussions, and I came into contact with the core principle of the dialogue of self-liberation. And the core principle of the dialogue of self-liberation is to identify the things which have been holding you back, to identify the communications towards yourself about the past, and no longer pollute the present or the future with them. So identify those communications which have limited you, and then no longer engage in them. And what happened is I because, you know, you're so patient and so compassionate and so kind, like, I wrongly interpreted this principle as being weak, because it didn't have the it didn't have the certainty contained in the focus on what you want, you know. And I was like, I misinterpreted that explanation of TDSL, that understanding of that core principle, as it being the exact opposite of the other one, right? So one was saying focus on what you want, not on what you don't want, and then the other one was saying, you know, it appeared to me that TDSL was saying focus on what you don't want. Doesn't matter what you do want, focus on what you don't want. And so I completely got the wrong end of the stick, really. And we maintained our friendship. You know, I still practiced with you. Your band played at the night we put on at the Boogaloo, and, you know, we had lots of engagements, and we were good friends still. But we didn't engage in that conversation anymore, right? For quite some time. You know, I went on my life, and I followed all of the practices that, you know, these personal development books were espousing as working, and I became a voracious reader of personal development and personal growth books. And I applied them. One thing that I'm very good at is applying things. Like, you know, I take information, I can apply it very rapidly into my life. And so I was applying these principles, and I achieved many things. You know, I set up a company, a digital company, that I was able to, you know, it worked. It was largely automated, and, you know, generated hundreds of thousands of dollars. I moved my family to Asia. I did, you know, we did lots of the things that I wanted to accomplish. I was making progress with, but I was still not satisfied. Like, there was something missing. That, you know, I wasn't achieving all of these things, and still things were struggling, and you know, I wasn't quite attaining those things, and you know, I always felt like I was at a deficit, if that makes sense. Is that I was is like I was always striving for something, and therefore it was never okay. There was always a need for more, and that was often an uncomfortable feeling, right? An uncomfortable sensation, and there were many things that I hadn't achieved, and so like I suppose I'd had this belief, and when this happens, I will be happy, fulfilled, you know, all this. And of course, not everything on you know that list, that those wish lists actually came true. And so one day, you know, I started thinking maybe, you know, a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I started thinking, oh, I think there's something, you know, I think there's something a bit fishy about all this goal setting. I think, you know, it's more limited than people are letting on. I think, you know, I think goals are obviously very useful, but I think there's also a dark side to goal setting, and, you know, even in achieving things or in personal satisfaction. And then my relationship, you know, a couple of years later, this is now, you know, 3 years ago, my relationship went through a very difficult patch with my wife, and you know, we were struggling to communicate with each other, and you know, she was failing to understand what I was communicating, and I, you know, I was admittedly not communicating very well, and I would become frustrated, and then she would become more withdrawn, and you know, I would feel like she was, you know, directly sabotaging my efforts to try and help the family, and you know, and we were just in a very difficult place, and it was a very hard time for us. And I reached out to you. You know, I remember actually that before, there was two things that led up to that. Like I was putting something on top of a cupboard next to the bed in our bedroom, and I was putting it up, and I suddenly remembered something that you had said to me 10 years previous, and the specific thing, your words came back to my mind as you said them, and you said, you know, Peter, it's like this. It's about identifying those things that we no longer want in our lives, and then no longer engaging in them. And I remember as I was putting this thing up, and it just hit me, and I was like, oh shit, he was right. You know, that's if I was no longer engaging in those limiting things, then all the other things would, you know, feel easier. And it was a sort of this big sort of eye-opening moment for me. I was like, and I've spent all this time ignoring those things because I've been so focused on these things that I wanted to achieve that I hadn't noticed, like the things which I was engaging in, which were limiting me and holding me back. And you said it's more about, it's not about lying to ourselves and saying that we're happier or better, or you know, it's going successfully. It's not about, you know, telling ourselves something and hoping for the best. It's about looking at what the situation is and identifying those things which we've been doing or which have been there, which are not useful, and then stopping doing them, right? That's the pragmatic way to help us to move forwards. And all of a sudden it hit me like a flash of lightning. And I remember sitting on the bed and I sort of did that Home Alone pose like this. And I was like, oh my God, he was right. And then I also spoke with someone who had been to see you, who was a good friend of mine. And we'd been talking, and you came up in conversation, and he mentioned how his wife had been to see you about something she had struggled with many years. And I hadn't known that she'd been to see you. And I mean, I don't even know if I've mentioned this to you. I'm not sure, actually. Maybe it's the first time, or maybe I did. And he said that when she came back from her session with you, it was like she had flicked a switch in her brain, and the things that she had struggled with prior to that conversation were no longer an issue for her. Something had just changed. Something fundamental in her understanding of what she'd been doing had just changed. And then so, you know, the coincidence of these, you know, this flash of inspiration and hearing this story, it led me to reach out to you. And I think it had been, we hadn't spoke since I'd left the UK. So it had been, you know, 4 or 5 years since we'd we'd been in touch. And I remember I sent you a message on Facebook that went something along the lines of, Sheen, I just wanted to apologise for disregarding some of the things that you were very patiently explaining to me 10 years ago, because you were right, you know. And so after 10 years of sort of being quite closed, I think something we emphasize on the course, you know, largely because in my experience, I'm very passionate about emphasizing it, is this idea of beginner's mind. You know? If your cup's full, there's no space to pour new ideas, right? So it's this idea of having, you know, beginner's mind, always being willing to learn, always being willing to be open to new ideas. And so this is something that we emphasize, and had I had that 10 years ago, maybe, or 13 years ago, maybe it wouldn't have taken me 10 years to get to the point where I was, you know, ready to begin absorbing these concepts and applying them and learning them in my life.
And so what difference do you feel actually developing the dialogue of self-liberation over the last several years? What difference has it made to your life now? What your experience of being you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that at a very fundamental level, I am different. Like at a very fundamental level, you know, it's changed. Like applying these principles has fundamentally changed my experience of myself, of other people, of life. Yeah, at every level, at every conceivable level. So when I reached out to you and I asked you to help me, you know, 3 years ago, I said, Sheen, I'd like to be a better communicator. Can you teach me? And you said, oh, well, there's actually a guy in Thailand. You can you can go and study with him. You know, he's not that far from you. And I remember I sent a message which said, actually, I would, you know, I would appreciate if you could help me to communicate in a more effective way, because I believe that this will be, you know, better for my partner, better for my kids, better for myself, and better for anybody who I come into contact with in life. And you know, you after that message, you agreed, and we formed an arrangement where you would teach me these principles, as you hadn't taught anybody to that time, right? You'd worked with them with clients, but you hadn't actually spent the time to teach them.
That's correct. And
you would teach me these principles, and in return, I had a lot of marketing experience from my previous online business, and I would assist you to, you know, turn it into something that was available and accessible to a wider audience, right? Because there's something tremendously valuable here that should be shared. And so we embarked on that relationship, and at the time, you know, it was at the very end of a period in my relationship where the relationship had been breaking down, and I was hoping that through learning to communicate in the way that you communicated, this would make me basically what I acknowledge now is I was hoping that I would become more persuasive, a better influencer. So, you know, so it was my thought that clearly I was right, and that, you know, what I needed to do was be better at persuasion, so everybody else could just see that I was right, you know. And much to my benefit, actually, and my initial surprise, what we actually focused on was my communications with myself, you know, how I was communicating with myself at a fundamental level. What were the things that I was doing in representing situations to myself? And as And as I began to identify those patterns of self-communication, whether they were beliefs or thoughts or, you know, perspectives or visualizations, or even things that I was, you know, dialogues or monologues that I was saying to myself, or even things that I was saying to other people. As I became aware of some of those habitual patterns of communication, and then gradually began to no longer engage in them, or engage in them less and less and less, sort of, as we described, draw that line in the sand, you know, what I was no longer prepared to accept, and then begin the gradual process of like step by step moving away from that line and those patterns of communication. What happened is my communication with other people also naturally changed, you know, because I was experiencing life differently. Those communications that we make to ourselves, they determine how we experience life. They determine what our experience is. And so if we begin to experience things differently, then we have access to an entirely different set of options for how we choose to communicate with other people. And what happened, you know, I'd reached out to you in the hope that I would be able to save my relationship, because it was a very challenging, very, very difficult place. And actually what happened was the relationship completely broke down, you know, and, you know, my partner and kids, they left Asia. And you know, I had some choices and some things, some you know, some experiences that I had to make decisions about in that moment, or in those moments, in the time after they left. And by being able to communicate with myself more effectively, or I should say, being able to no longer communicate in you know, dramatically limiting or fearful or angry or sort of limiting and painful ways, I was able to process that experience differently, you know, and sit with those feelings and confront feelings. And by living in the now, I mean, this is a very, you know, TDSL thing. We're no longer referring to the past as if it was the present or the future. We get to live now and experience now by applying this principle in a very practical way through my perspectives and my language and the way I was acknowledging the situation. It meant that I was able to not hold on to those challenging feelings, and I could accept them for what they were and allow them to pass. And, you know, gradually over time, those feelings began, you know, they no longer arose. You know, I had very different feelings. I was able to cultivate, you know, feelings of compassion and love, and approach, you know, the situation with my family very differently. And it's taken time. You know, it's been a couple of years since that incident, and I've worked very closely with you and on the project. But over those 2 years, the development throughout that period of my relationship with my partner has been tremendous, right? And we're in like such a different place now, in experiencing now very differently to how we would have been, where we would have been if I'd continued to communicate towards myself, and therefore also to the other people, as I had been, from a place of fear and frustration and anger and, you know, self-doubt and, you know, lack of self-confidence. So very, on a very fundamental level, it's changed everything. And now it's changed my relationship with my kids. It's changed my relationship with my partner, and it's provided me opportunities and options. It enabled me to, you know, at the time when the relationship broke down, you know, I was 92 kilos and you know, in a lot of physical pain. And through changing, you know, the ways in which I was communicating with myself, I was able to completely, you know, change my life around, right? Change how you know, I communicated, change how I was eating, how I was training, you know, how I was engaging, you know, sleeping patterns, all these things. These are things that they gradually I was able to shift them because of the ways in which I began to communicate with myself. Right? And now, you know, in the last couple of years, I've been able to have a couple of professional Kankamai or Muay Thai fights here in Thailand. I train very regularly, not in Thailand, sorry, in Cambodia. I've been able to train very regularly. I've been able to work on this project with you, and like challenges that life has thrown. This has been a very challenging year for many people around the world, and the challenges that life has thrown at me are very easily handled. You know, sometimes life is difficult. This is the nature of life, right? The nature of life is that there's challenge. You know. But through learning the dialogue of self-liberation and applying it practically on a daily basis, I've been able to handle all of these situations and remain in a good space when dealing with these challenges. So at a very fundamental level, all the way through my life, in my relationships, in my own experience, in my health, you know, in my working relationships, it's revolutionized my experience of life. Made me more compassionate and more forgiving of myself, which is fundamental to being able to change, right? Mm. You know, like if a child is learning to walk and you know a parent is shouting at that child for every time it falls over, it's going to take much longer for the child to learn to walk than if the parent is encouraging and each fall is accurately perceived as a learning opportunity, an opportunity for growth, right? And then the walking comes much quicker. And with the dialogue of self-liberation, we learn to communicate to ourselves in a more effective way, not polluting the present or the future with the past. And in so doing, should we engage in those patterns, they become opportunities for us to identify what we're no longer willing to accept. And that helps us to develop quicker and more faster. And through this greater compassion and self-forgiveness, we naturally begin to change and more quickly, and this is what spills into the world, right? This is then what we put into our communications with other people. So yeah, so it's revolutionized everything, Sheen.
That's awesome, mate. It's wonderful to hear, and I can attest. I could say exactly the same thing myself about this. I'm extremely thankful to my teacher Vernon Bell, because what he did and how he helped me, the understanding he passed on to me, has totally turned my life around for the better on every level. And it's helped all the many clients I've worked with over the last 17 years to do the same and to turn things around for the better for themselves. So there's one thing that you bring to this. Obviously, we're both co-founders of the Dialogue of Self-Liberation in the project that we're developing. And one of the things that wonderful quality you've brought to this work is your rationality and your scientific emphasis on research results. So one of the things that you spent many hours doing is gathering together research results that validate the methodology of the Dialogue of Self-Liberation. Could you speak a little bit about what this means to you and what you've discovered through these various different types of scientific research results in relation to the Dialogue of Self-Liberation?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'd like to say, you know, I didn't actually set out to gather results that validated the principle. This wasn't my goal. So when we made our initial arrangement, I was going to help you to systemize, you know, your knowledge, and you were going to teach it to me. You know, it was a very sort of beneficial relationship for both of us, right? So it was this exciting process that we were going through together. And at that time, I wasn't certain, you know, it wasn't anticipated that I would necessarily be engaged in this for the long term. You know, like it was, you know, I was going to help you to do this, turn it into something, and you know, I was going to learn, and then we'd see where we were going after that. So it was only through the tremendous amount of benefit that I experienced immediately, right? You know, like immediately began experiencing in my life through applying this principle, that made me realize, oh, there's definitely something here. This is amazing. And then it was through seeing the results that I was getting, and through experiencing the different quality in life that I had, that I was like, no, this is important. You know, like we need to go somewhere with this. But as you said, I'm a very rationally minded person. So I wanted to know whether it actually had legs, you know, whether it would be validated. I wanted to know whether it had legs scientifically, you know, whether it actually, you know, was it just us, you know, imagining? Was it just placebo, or was there actually something fundamental there, as I believed? And obviously, as you had discovered over the 17 years that you've been working with the principle and working with people. And what I discovered is that with a resounding yes, this work is very well validated, you know, by the research and the science there into research into language, research into beliefs, research into how the brain evolves and develops and learns new skills, research into how we can use visualization to affect things, like how, you know, amazing work coming out of the California in the US, and into how visualization is used for stroke recovery, how visualization can and mental practices can create self-compassion, how visualization can be used to tap in to old memories and change them, how it can be used to successfully resolve anxiety conditions and phobias and things like this. This research is prolific and well validated, actually, and the very specific principle and application, the very specific perspective of the dialogue of self-liberation, which really helps us to create a psychological existence between, a psychological distance between now, our experience now, and our experience then in the past, you know, and this as well has been researched. So there's a resounding amount of information, and my background, my rational mind, you could say. I grew up, science was always my thing. It was my thing at school. You know, my school, I was raised to go to medical school. I went to medical school. After I, did 3 years at medical school, and then I decided that I wanted to change, and I moved to philosophy. I did philosophy. I got a Bachelor of Science, in my acupuncture, and have continued to voraciously read scientific papers. This format of information, I find, is how I assimilate information and understand it, and turn it into something I can apply in my life. And so when I used this skill to begin researching TDSL and the principles, the methodologies and the systems which underlie the principle of TDSL, I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. And for me, for many people, they just need to see the benefits in their lives. They just need to feel those benefits in their lives. For me, it was the missing link. It was like, okay, this is how this works. This is how this has action. This isn't just something that's been passed down from Vernon to Sheen. There's research on this, and a lot of research. So it was the missing link, and it just made it come together. And I think one advantage of doing it was, you had been practicing one-to-one, and in one-to-one sessions, it's very easy to sort of tailor the experience to a client. They come in, they're discussing openly what's going on for them, and you can sort of, you were delivering the same process, the same principle, but you can make it applicable for them. You can take them through those steps. But understanding, the science and the psychology, as I did, which is what I brought to this, through through my own experience in sales and marketing, but also through my research of the papers. It enabled us to systemize it and put it into a system that we can transmit to groups of people in 5 weeks, you know. And I feel like it provided those missing steps. So it's like, oh, okay, so we can do this, and then this, and then this, and it forms like a nice progression. And I think what the science really substantiates, what the science really supports, is that the application of the principle has a benefit. And for me, this is the thing: when we apply the benefit, when we change how we're perceiving, or the language we're using, you know, or the ways in which we're perceiving an experience, so that it's no longer, you know, a current experience, right? We refer to it accurately as an experience that we have had in the past. When we do this, we create a psychological distance between that experience which we have had, you know, and where we are now. And this simple change enables us to feel lighter now, right? And this is validated. This is scientifically validated. And that in itself is the benefit in that moment that enables us then to see different opportunities or to act in new ways, that because we're no longer restricted by that experience that we have had, you know, something we have experienced, but it's not something that's current for us now. And that gives us new opportunities. And so the science really enables that aspect. It really validates that, you know, the application in real time now. And what I hadn't expected from my ongoing engagement in the dialogue of self-liberation is what comes after that. So like, if we continually apply this principle, then what happens is we begin steering over time a very different course for our ship. And it's a much easier and a much lighter course. And so what happens is, you know, we get all of these other more profound, so we experience that benefit in the moment where we feel lighter, and it's easier for us to choose more successful options. You know, we can react differently and more appropriately or more authentically in the moment, because we have that sort of separation from the past. But if we do this consistently, we actually get tremendously profound benefits. And this has blown me away. Like, just being more compassionate towards yourself enables you to make more authentic choices for yourself. It enables you to forgive yourself. It, you know, enables more opportunities, but then it also enables for you to be more compassionate for other people and the people in your life. It's like, if you have a jug of water or beer or whatever you want in your jug, you can only give some to someone else if you've got some in yours to start with. And so it's like with compassion, if like we can only give compassion to another person if we actually have compassion on the inside for ourselves, you know. And the same for forgiveness. The way that we treat ourselves and you know, the standards that we hold to ourselves, this is what's going to spill into the world. You know, this is what we're going to spill into the world. And so from this very simple application, this very simple validated application, you actually, if you commit to applying it and you apply it flexibly in your life and consistently in your life, you actually will get tremendously profound benefits over the course of time, you know. Tremendous.
When you speak about the tremendous benefits of this, this is a theme because I've been conducting interviews now for a few months actually with a variety of people who've completed the TDSL live program. And I've been interviewing them as I'm interviewing you now about the experience of learning and applying the dialogue of self-liberation. Now, one of the things we emphasize in TDSL is what Vernon referred to as passing the baton. And passing the baton is sharing the principle and sharing the information with people so that they're able to transform how they communicate toward themselves and basically to liberate themselves from unnecessary suffering. Now, I've seen the incredible transformation in people. Many people have come to see me over the years in all kinds of states of broken, and I've seen people totally turn things around in their lives. through developing the understanding of the principle and then applying it decisively and actively in their lives. Now, I've had a real great, it's been a great pleasure for me and a privilege to see these transformations in people and to see how they turn their lives around. Now, when we've been running the live program together, one thing that has also been really wonderful for me is to hear you speak about the very things that Vernon taught me, filtered through the lens of your own unique experience. But because I understand the principle so well after all these years, I also recognize that you understand it really, really well. And it's an absolute pleasure for me to see and hear you describe things to the people on the live program so eloquently, so passionately, and so clearly, and with a lightness and a humor. And it's a wonderful thing for me. I wanted to ask you, now that you're sharing the information with people and you're beginning to see how people are responding to this, how they're relating to this, how transformational they find the information to be, how rewarding do you feel the passing of the baton is for you?
That's an interesting question, actually. So the way I put it is like this. It's you know, our very first live program that we ran. I remember it was around about the fourth dialogue. You know, we break the program into 5 sessions, and each session we call a dialogue. So it was the fourth session or the fourth dialogue. And I remember one of the participants, who's a friend of mine, someone I know, turning around and saying, like, "Oh my God, I've just understood something. Oh wow!" And that changes everything. You know, and they were so excited. They were just like blown away by this. And even speaking to them, you know, now months after, the benefit that realization has had in their lives, you know, and that was the first program that we ran several months ago, and that was after, you know, maybe 5 months of writing and rewriting, and, you know, like you and I had maybe 45 hours of recorded conversation. You know, I mean, we probably had over 100 hours, but I've recorded 45 of them. And like that was me, like listening to the sessions that we had and systemizing everything and structuring everything, and, you know, identifying all of the different principles, and, you know, turning it into, rather than, you know, something that's innate to you that you learned from Vernon, turning it into something that, you know, that was, you know, tangibly in the world, right? Like its own system that could be understood outside of the, you know, someone could pick it up and begin to understand it. And that, you know, that in itself took hundreds of hours. And then there was the writing of those dialogues, you know, I mean, 40,000 words. I can't remember how many words, but, you know, probably 40 to 50,000 words that, you know, that we wrote, writing and then reading it through, and then and correcting and changing and paying attention to the metaphors that we were using to make sure they were consistent and they were accurate, explaining and ensuring that we were emphasizing the right point, planning the structure so that the realizations would happen, you know, step by step in time. Like this like a tremendous amount of work went into evolving that process. Right? It felt tremendously natural, and it was wonderful and exciting to be a part of. But it was many hours and a lot of work that went into it. And so when that participant turned around and said that, and it was a dear friend of mine, a friend called Steffi, and when she said that, it was like, it's already been worth it. all of that, anything else now is a bonus. You know, like it's all of that has been worth it for the benefit that person had. It was already worth it, and that was just one person. And then since then, we've seen many more people, And each time it's been like, they've had their own realizations, and that, you know, like sometimes people have been really struggling with some things, and they've known they've been struggling with some challenges in the way that they've been communicating. But other times people have come, they were just interested, right? They're like, hey, you know, I'm interested in learning a life skill, you know, you know, whatever. Like like Lee, who joined us recently, the guy who has to be on point with his thinking and his management of stress and anxiety in his work, and how he had complete, I mean, he in his interview he said he had complete a lack of awareness. I mean, I think in his own words he said something along the lines of, you know, I have, you know, thoughts and issues, and other people have issues, and, you know, that's just the way it is. I never realized that, you know, I could begin a process of changing how I was perceiving or speaking or thinking about those things until I started this course. And in hearing his realization when he was like, oh, I could do it like that, how I have been doing it, but I could also do this new thing over here, which is not, or not this new thing, but I could also just no longer do that. And then like hearing him, and he's like, oh my God, it's like in the moment he realized the benefit. And then since then he's been like, this is tremendously useful, invaluable to his work, to his life, to his relationships with other people. And he didn't even know what it was for, right? He had no understanding what the benefit was. Again, boom, amazing. Like even that one thing, that one person gaining that experience pays back all of the effort that went into this. Right? And this has happened, you know, Matt, Jeff, so many people on this live program. In fact, I think every person who's been on the live program has had, you know, a realization, an understanding, or begun developing this skill, which they've then applied in their lives and been like, oh wow, this is fantastic, you know. And this, and to me, that makes it all worthwhile. So, and to me, that's passing the baton, right? We've taken this information and we've gone, here you go. You know, here's this understanding. This is how I use it. This is how I see it. This is how I understand it. And you've gone, this is how I use it. This is how I see it. And then they've come along and they've picked it up and they've gone, oh, is it like this? How about this? And we've gone, oh yeah, that's it. And they've gone, oh great, thank you. And then it's become theirs, you know? So it's, you know, at that point, it's not ours, like it's not our dialogue of self-liberation, it's then their dialogue of self-liberation. And then they've brought new metaphors, new understanding to it as well. And so it's become this living, breathing, evolving thing. And like, you know, people picking this up and people moving this forwards and passing the baton to people, that's, you know, that makes it all worthwhile, right? You know, that makes it all worthwhile. And the fact that they are then taking this baton and then telling other people about it and saying, hey, go see these guys, go speak to these guys, go check out the dialogue of self-liberation. It's awesome, right? The fact that they're then willing to go to their family, their friends, and tell them about us and tell them what we're doing, or even the fact that that in their lives they're applying the principle, and so they're, you know, leading by example, right? Helping their friends. Like Jeff, a recent attendee on the course, he said to me, he said, you know, I went to see a friend who was having a difficult time, and and I made a recommendation for, you know, how we could change how he was perceiving it based on the dialogue of self-liberation, and it completely changed that friend's experience for him, right? Completely changed his friend's experience. And he says, and you know, even 2-3 weeks later, that friend is still saying to me, thank you so much. You completely changed that opportunity for me. And so, you know, like I had a completely different experience because of that recommendation you made. So the fact that it's spreading and these people are sending people to us, and that, you know, like that's, I mean, that's it, right? That's what it's all about. So yeah, it's fantastic. It's the most rewarding thing.
I feel the same way, Peter.
One more thing.
Go ahead.
And you know, it's not just passing the baton, like passing the baton in my relationships, right? In my relationship with my partner, in my relationships with my kids, You know, seeing how they take the baton and then apply it in their own lives from such a young age, right? Overcoming anxieties and fears, no longer engaging in certain, you know, behaviors or thoughts that are not useful to them. You know, like developing this understanding of like, what, you know, what do you want to carry with you? You know, what are the things which are worth keeping hold of? The behaviors, the ways of thinking which are worth engaging in, and what are those which maybe either don't belong to you, right, are not yours, that you've picked up somewhere else, or are just not useful, right? And this is tremendously rewarding to see these guys developing this skill, you know, or it's seeping into my relationships with other people. Not even just from passing the baton in an obvious way by you know, by speaking to people or teaching people, but just by living the principle, by applying the principle in my life, you know, leading by example, right? People get to see how you're engaging, see how you're living, and things start to click, you know.
So I'm curious to hear from you. Where do you see the dialogue of self-liberation going? Where can this go? What do you feel this can become?
It's an interesting question, you know. So I've gone from you know, a good friend who understood the value in this work and just thought I was going to, you know, change a habit or, you know, a way I was communicating, learn a new skill. Basically, I thought, oh, I was just going to learn a new skill, to gaining an understanding of something that's just completely changed my life. You know, dramatically changed my life for the better. And then as we've begun spreading this with, you know, with people not only in my life but on the live programs, and I've seen the dramatic changes it's had for these people, and heard the things that they're saying and the benefits that they've been feeling. You know, I've had this growing awareness of how important this is. I've had this developing awareness of, damn, this is valuable. This is important. This is useful. This is changing, very literally changing people's lives, right? It's changed my life. I mean, it's so many of the people that we've spoken to that, you know, who've had dramatic changes in their lives, in the ways that they're communicating, in the things that they've had to deal with, you know, whether they realized that there was benefits to be had or not before they started. So I can say with all sincerity that I believe this is going to change. It's going to change the world, right? It already is changing the world for all the people that it's coming into contact with. It's changing the world, right? And this is the thing, and this is why I think it's so valuable, right? It's not changing the world because it's telling people how to live, you know? Like, it's not, this is not like, you know, some self-help, you know, guru principle. This is not a religion. You know, there's nothing pious or religious about this. There's no commandment. This isn't telling people how to live. And I think this is why it's going to change the world, because it's not telling people what they should do. This very literally is just a new way of seeing the world. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses, or maybe it's a little bit like taking off a pair of blurry glasses so that you can see the world clearly for a change. You know, it's like when, you know, people, when they were used to watch, you know, like low definition TVs, you know, before HD, and they were like, oh, they're inventing HD. What do we need HD for? You know, TV looks great, you know, and then HD came out, and they're like, oh my God, it's amazing, you know. And now you see the old TVs and HD, you know, 4K TVs next to each other, and you're like, oh, that's why. it does look so much better. It's so much clearer. It's so much. And this is the experience of TDSL, right? It's a principle that you apply in your life, in your way, right? It's just a fundamental truth of the world, right? We're alive now. Stop. So don't pollute it. Don't limit it with the past, right? Just engage with it. And it's a fundamental truth. It's a simple way to apply it. And when you apply it, it's like going to high definition. All of a sudden, things make sense. Things are clearer, right? But it's not telling you how you should live. It's just an understanding of how you can perceive things, and in higher definition, and more with greater clarity and greater honesty and greater authenticity. you know, how you can become a more authentic version of yourself.
One of the things we mentioned in the live program toward the latter part is that TDSL is the Kung Fu of now, the Kung Fu of presence, the Kung Fu of self-compassion.
Yeah. I want to say to anybody that's hearing this, come and join us. Join us now. We're doing regular free introductory talks and seminars, you know, where we can answer questions and we describe the principle in more detail so that you can get an introduction and understand what it is that the dialogue of self-liberation is and what it isn't, and how you can benefit in your life. So if you're interested, the link is going to be in the About section for this video. You know, check us out on tdsl.live. See what we're all about. Join that introductory call. And you know, if there's things that in your life that you've been experiencing which you no longer want to experience, you know, communications with yourself or recurrent feelings or something like this, then TDSL can help you with that. But also, if you just want to learn a new life skill, like how much, if you want to learn to be able to communicate more effectively with yourself and discover benefits that you may not be aware of, just check in, hop on the introductory call, and we'll share in greater detail how you can benefit and what it's all about.
So Peter, I'd like to say a huge thank you. And I'm sure that we will have many other opportunities over the years to come to discuss these kind of things in more detail with people like this. This is a first for us, and it's a great pleasure for me to interview you in this way. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak about this.
Thanks for being interested to ask me.
I am. And yeah, lots and lots of love to you, my friend, and I'll speak to you soon.
I'll speak to you really soon. Lots of love, mate.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.